Hello and welcome back. I thought we had a pretty crazy deadline yesterday. Maybe some of your teams didn't make as many moves as you would have expected, but it could be worse. You could be a Bruins fan watching the end of an era, losing their captain for a second-round pick. I've been there before when the Rangers traded away McDonough and JT Miller. That was brutal. Some of those deals are more fantasy relevant than others, and some may be good adds for the upcoming week. So let's jump into a quick deadline breakdown. Now, we'll start it off by looking at this chart here. This is a list of the guys who are, recently traded at the deadline, not before the last couple of days. Obviously there have been some big trades this season. This is just the trade deadline stuff. And you see their new teams here, whether or not they have a 4-game week this week. That's the green box. This is a 2-game week for Dallas. So Rantanen comes in, he'll get some rest. And then this number you see here is the remaining games. This is not including week 25. Most of you have your playoffs 22 to 24. So this is from this week, week 21 to 24, and this is how many games they have. So some of these could be longer term holds. Some of them could be short term plays for just this upcoming week. Here's their ownership percentages. We're not going to touch on Rantanen or Marchand because they're pretty much not ownable with the way that they have performed this year. They've been really good. We'll start it off by looking at one of the trades that went down. Josh Norris, 31% owned. He is probably going to be power play 1. I think these are still left over from Ottawa. He hasn't been in a game yet, so we don't have the line assignment yet, but he should be power play 1 and line 2. The thing that I've liked about him all year owning him is the hits volume, 2.5 hits per game. Shot volume is a little bit low at 1.77. Power play numbers have been good, and the goal scoring 93rd percentile. That's going to help, hopefully help the Buffalo Sabres in the future. It's definitely not going to help them get into the playoffs this year. I have them in green here. They have a 3-game week, but they have a Monday, Wednesday, light night setup. So if you want to add them for the beginning of the week and then find somebody with 3 games and 4 nights towards the end of the week, that could get you 5 total games. So that's why they're listed here. They have 14 games between now and the end of week 24 when most of your playoffs are over. So he did lose a game in terms of going from Ottawa to Buffalo. You can see here the guy he got traded for was Dylan Cousins. He's added a game. So they have a 4-game week in Ottawa, and we'll turn it over and look at Dylan Cousins. He did play today. He was on line 2, power play 2. Line 2 was Perron with Cousins and Batherson. Cousins and Batherson have played together internationally before, so hopefully they can find some chemistry. 91st percentile in hits for Dylan Cousins is a little bit surprising to me, but that is excellent in terms of his hits coverage, 91st percentile. Shot volume is better, 2.28 shots per game. Power play numbers are a lot worse, and the goal scoring has been a lot worse. Point per game number is lower as well. So hopefully he can get a little bit of a bump, but he didn't see a lot of ice time today, and I don't know how they're going to utilize him going forward. I would assume he stays line 2, power play 2, which kind of gives a ceiling to his file. But they also brought over Fabian Zetterlund, who wasn't in the game today. And him coming from San Jose to a team like this, he was kind of a middle 6 player there, kind of top 6, getting some power play time. He was line 2, power play 2. I don't think he's going to stay on line 2 or power play 2 in Ottawa. Probably line 3, but that's not going to matter too much because he's got his hits volume, 1.8 hits per game. Is nice to see from him, 2.2 shots per game, and then the goal scoring as well. So kind of similar to Norris, just lower in everything. But he is relatively complete in terms of a peripheral guy. Good for categories leagues, going to get you the shot volume and the hits every week. 4-game week for him. 15 games for both Cousins and Zetterlund going forward from now until the end of your playoffs. Now, looking up, the one guy we didn't touch on yet is Jake Wallman. This is from San Jose. Even though I did update these this morning, he will not be power play 1. So that's the main detriment here. So some of these guys going from San Jose to other places, guys like Granlund, maybe in a lesser role, a little bit less power play time. Same thing for Jake Wallman. He probably won't be the power play 1 guy. He might be the power play 2 guy. They do have Klingberg there. They have Bouchard. They have Wallman now. But 98th percentile in blocks is excellent. He should be able to continue that. 2.5 shots per game is also excellent. The assists are still probably going to be there, especially playing with the guys that he could potentially be playing with in the top 6 in Edmonton. So the 3 main metrics that you'd use him for, blocks, shots, and assists, should continue. The power play numbers will probably drop. He's 60% owned right now. I could see that dropping a little bit since he's losing that power play time. Now, coming into this trade, Brock Nelson was red hot. I believe he had over a point per game. He had 8 points in 7 games over the last 2 weeks. So he was red hot heading into the trade deadline. He comes to Colorado as their second line center, probably playing with Nichushkin. I don't know who else they're going to put with him on that line. Line 2, power play 2. I don't see how he fits into power play 1, but they could give him a shot there. He's probably good enough to play in that spot in the bumper. But with that, he could anchor their power play 2. You could get value from a guy like Ross Colton, maybe Devon Taves on that power play unit if they're going to use both units. 93rd percentile in shots is excellent for Nelson, 2.66 shots per game. The goal numbers are pretty good as well, 89th percentile there. Not a lot of hits and blocks, and not a lot of power play production. Only 4 power play points up to this point in the season. The Islanders' power play was atrocious, so this could actually help boost his power play numbers, even being on power play 2 in Colorado, just because of the talent around him. And as you can see there, Nelson going from the Isles to Colorado, 4-game week and 14 games remaining on the schedule. We do have one other guy right below him, Logan Stankoven. They don't have a great setup this week, a 3-game week, and only 12 games from now until the end of your playoffs. So maybe not the best volume play, but he will factor into their top 6. Right now, this is line 1, power play 2. I think that's from Dallas. It's hard to tell. These are taken from Daily Faceoff. 91st percentile in shots is still going to hold up, 2.5 shots per game. I could see him fitting into Rod Brindamore's system really well. He's a fast skater. He's talented. He back checks really hard. I could see him fitting really well with this system. So I don't know where he's going to factor in terms of the power play. Power play numbers will probably stay in and around this range unless he takes a huge jump, being on power play 1 or finding some chemistry with Sebastian Aho, something like that. But that's not something you can bank on necessarily, and the peripherals aren't there the way that they are with some of these other guys. So maybe not the best play in terms of volume or peripherals. You're hoping for a bump just based on his line assignment. If that comes in line 1 with Aho and power play 1, then obviously he would be a little bit more valuable. 20% is not bad if you wanted to take a flyer on this. If you're in a playoff spot and you just wanted to see if this works, maybe add him for next week while you're not necessarily searching for a win in the final week of the regular season, and see how it goes. You could get a really nice premium on him at 20%. That's going to do it for the trade deadline stuff. Now let's take a look at the schedule the way that we always do. The Week 21 schedule, there's 10 teams that play 4 times, plus you've got Buffalo, who has the 2 light nights on Monday and Wednesday. You can see Buffalo here and here against Edmonton and against Detroit. But the 2 best schedules are Utah and Detroit. They've got the perfect Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday setup, even though technically speaking, Friday at 6 and Sunday at 7 are not technically light nights in terms of this metric here. But this is a perfect setup in the sense that you're not getting back-to-backs. These guys should be well rested. And these teams are desperate for playoff spots. The Detroit Red Wings go really hot and then really cold. They are cold right now. Utah heating up heading into this week, so there are some ads we can look at, and we will look at both of these teams in detail. You also have Colorado with the front-loaded back-to-back and a winnable game here against Chicago, who's depleted now after the deadline. This game is still pretty difficult in terms of, the defense is still pretty solid there for Minnesota. They're starting to get a little bit healthier. And then they've got this very difficult game against Dallas on Sunday. This is going to be must-see TV and a must-see playoff series, as they will probably meet in the first round. In terms of Edmonton, they're making the East Coast swing, Buffalo, and then Jersey and the Islanders back-to-back with the Rangers at the end of the week. The Rangers will be traveling back, and they will be on the second night of a back-to-back. So this is a decent setup for the Oilers. There's just not a lot to look at in terms of their ads. The top guys are owned up. Florida, they play Boston. What a heartbreaker for Boston fans to see Marchand go to Florida, who ousted them in the playoffs a couple years ago, and now they've got to play them in what would probably be Marchand's first game as a Panther, unless he can get there this weekend. But still, one of the first games as a Panther, and they got to play the Boston Bruins. That's really brutal for Bruins fans. But with that, they've got 4 road games and a road back-to-back to end the week, so maybe not the best week to add Panthers in general, but there are some options available, and there are some guys getting it done. Bennett's playing pretty well. Samoskevich we'll talk about later on as well. The Rangers, we've talked about them a couple times lately. Will Cooley's your main ad there. We'll get into that later, but they've got 3 road games, and then again, that travel on the second night of a back-to-back to go back home to play the Oilers. That's going to be difficult. All of these are must-win games, and they just gifted a game to the Ottawa Senators. The Senators gained a point in the standings by coming back from down 3-1 in today's game, And so they sit, I believe, in the last wild card spot. They've got Detroit, then they travel at Philly, then back home for Boston, and then traveling to Toronto for this game. So front-loaded 3 and 4, that could pay off if you want to pair this with somebody playing a back-loaded 3 and 4. You could potentially get out and get a 5-game week out of that. And then last and probably least is Anaheim. They've got this back-to-back. You could potentially see, 2 goaltenders here. I don't know how Gibson's doing, so we could see a different goaltender as the backup. But Dostal, if Gibson's hurt, he could be the guy, so that will come up in the goaltending section. They have a nice setup here against Nashville on Friday, and not the worst, with Parayko out, no less, in terms of this last game on Sunday against St. Louis. Not pictured here, Vancouver, they have 2 back-to-backs, Tuesday, Wednesday against Montreal, Calgary, and then Saturday, Sunday at Chicago and Utah. So some winnable games there, but 2 back-to-backs means you'll probably see their backup goaltender. I don't know if it's Shilovs or somebody else at this point, but Lankinen is the starter with Demko out. I don't know if Demko's expected back, but you'll get 2 games from Lankinen and 2 from the backup. Hopefully, unless they do what Vejmelka did the other night and play both back-to-backs, which was not good for him. Then you also have Vegas. They play Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. They're all on the road. Pittsburgh, Columbus, Buffalo, Detroit. Because a lot of heavy nights are factored in there, they're not listed here. But they still do have a 4-game week, and we'll go over 1 or 2 ads from them later on in the video. But first, before we get into anything else, let's get into the 2 best schedules this week. We'll start it with Utah and their animated graph. So what you see here is what you would expect. Nothing crazy in the top section over here where you've got somebody breaking out and leading the league in any particular category, but Clayton Keller kind of separating himself. You've got Gunther, you've got Cooley, Schmaltz, Sergachev. So here's Gunther. He's obviously going to score a ton of goals on the power play. He hits a little bit, so he a little bit better in terms of a category league ad. Keller is your best option in general. Logan Cooley has been really good in stretches this year. Sergachev just going about his business, a steady, peripheral type defenseman. He was quarterbacking power play 1. They have Sean Durzi in there now. He hasn't scored any power play points yet, so it looks to be Sergachev still. You have Nick Schmaltz, who's definitely available. We'll talk about him in a minute. Kesselring was getting some power play time. That bumped him up a little bit. I don't know how much he's going to be getting that power play time now. You've got hitters in Liam O'Brien and Jack McBain, so a ton of different options, and that means we will start by looking at the player hub and going over some of the guys that you can find from Utah. As we look at the player hubs for the Utah Hockey Club, you can see Keller here, 95% owned. He's their top scorer, 72 points. There is a pretty big gap between him and Nick Schmaltz, but Schmaltz is their second highest scorer on the team, 27% ownership. We'll definitely look at him in just a second. As I want to just look through these ownership percentages, the next highest rated guy in terms of points is Logan Cooley. He's at 45% owned, so he might be available for you in a 12-team league. Pretty good numbers in terms of power play. He's getting power play exposure. We'll go over him in a second. You also have Dylan Gunther, who, if he's available, look at the goal totals, 23 goals in 51 games, so a better goal pace than a guy like Keller. A little bit less in terms of overall points, but 45 points in 51 games, 0.88 points per game is the second highest. So to get him at 67%, that's a pretty decent value. That's probably what he should be going for. I just picked him up heading into this week. We also have Sergachev, who's definitely owned up. You've got Hayton, another guy we'll talk about at 11%, 36 points on the year. He's heating up lately. Michelli has seemed to fallen out of favor. We'll maybe touch on McBain a little bit. And there is Sean Durzi, who we could potentially also look at. But before we do any of that, let's take a look at the guys we just talked about. Nick Schmaltz is maybe your best ad from this team. He's dual position eligible, center, right wing, 27% owned, line 1, power play 1, and getting some penalty kill time. 2.16 shots per game is pretty nice. 93rd percentile in power play and in assists. He's got 49 points on the year, 14 goals, 35 assists. So really nice power play 1 exposure for a guy at that ownership percentage. He's going to be relatively valuable. You might not need that positional flexibility this week because of the fact that they've got those games Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. But if you do, he is dual position eligible, which should help as well. Logan Cooley, I mentioned, was the next guy on that list in terms of total points. He's another staple on their power play, line 1, power play 2 apparently right now. So he seems to be demoted a little bit. 4 points in his last 6 games. 92nd percentile in power play, 93rd in assists, and then 2.09 shots per game. So these 3 metrics looks very similar between Cooley and Nick Schmaltz, and Schmaltz is dual position eligible and cheaper in terms of his roster percentage. So that's why Schmaltz is probably your best ad this week, but Logan Cooley is another really good ad as well. He's been, you can see him climbing up here for quite a while. This was the break and then a little bit of a dip after the break, but he was playing really good hockey before that, and it's a 4-game week. They're trying to make a playoff push, so I would like either of these two. But with that said, Dylan Guenther's your best goal scoring option. 97th percentile, 0.45 goals per game pace. That's really excellent. 97th percentile there. 98th in power play. He gets power play goals. That's one of his main things that he does. 2.82 shots per game is going to be a nice peripheral floor for you. And he does hit. He's been racking up a couple hits lately. 0.69 on the year, but he's been averaging 1 to 2 hits per game over the last 7 or 8 games. So that's nice to see if you're in a bangers league or have that part of your point weighting. 21 power play points on the year is really excellent. That's why he's so high, 98th percentile there. 7 points in his last 9 games. Barrett Hayton's another guy we got to talk about. He's been relatively hot. Same thing, 7 points in his last 9. 4 goals, 3 assists. He's line 2, power play 1. So they seem to have moved him up and maybe moved Cooley down. So he will benefit from that if you can find him. He's 11% owned. So this may be a deeper league play because all of his numbers are a little bit lower than the guys we just talked about. But he is trending up, and he has been basically since the beginning of January. So really nice steady climb here. He kind of was going downward for a while and climbing himself out of it now. And this is a perfect week to grab a guy like this. Power play 1 exposure, really low roster percentage. You can find some value that way. And then I do want to cover a couple of guys. Josh Doan has been really improved. This is your super deep league play. Line 3, no power play exposure, but 6 points in his last 9 games. The shooting percentage is relatively low, so he could score a couple more goals heading into next week. So this is a guy who, occasionally gets time in the top 6 right now on line 3. He does occasionally get power play 2 times, so keep an eye out for that. This is probably your best deep league target. If you're looking specifically for hits, you've got Liam O'Brien, 3.67 hits per game. That is 99th percentile. If you're looking for a little bit of hits and some goal scoring, the goal scoring comes in bunches for Jack McBain. His shooting percentage earlier in the season when he was red hot was in the mid to high 30s. So now it's back down into this ideal range. He could potentially pop for a couple goals this week. He's got 69th percentile in terms of goals, 98th in terms of hits. So close to Liam O'Brien, but a little bit better in terms of goals. And he's getting some power play 2 exposure, 5% ownership for Jack McBain. In terms of D, there are a couple of different options you can go to. The one guy I do want to touch on, maybe because we haven't talked about him all year, is Sean Durzi. He's been a guy that I've looked at in years past. He's at 20% ownership right now. And this is a guy who quarterbacks a power play, depends on how they're feeling about it in terms of, right now. Yeah, so he's on the second pair. He's on the second power play. But they do use both of their units, so this should be a little bit better in terms of his power play production. No power play points so far. He will start to get those in the coming days and weeks, hopefully. 92nd percentile in terms of blocks, and just a really skilled player. So this is kind of an eye test thing. That's why he's 20% owned. Other than that, Kesselring was ownable at various points in the past. I don't know if I'd own him now because he's not going to get that power play exposure, but he is their second highest rated defenseman here. 12% owned, and he's a little bit higher in some of these metrics, a little bit more hits, but nothing crazy there. That's going to do it for our look with the Utah Hockey Club. Up next, let's take a look at the animated graph from the Detroit Red Wings, another 4-game week. Looking at the animated graph for the Detroit Red Wings, Sider popping off right at the beginning of the season. He was, 7-8 hits and blocks per game. He came back down to earth a little bit, but he's still doing all of that hitting and blocking. He was quarterbacking the power play last time I checked. So he's still incredibly valuable. You've got Dylan Larkin leading the way, Lucas Raymond, Alex DeBrincat. This power play unit is obviously going to drive this team. They are one of the most reliant teams in the league, dependent on their power play. Patrick Kane is another option. We will talk about him. You also have Casper here, and then this bunch of kind of not fantasy ownable guys. So let's turn and take a look at the player hub for these guys. Looking at the hub for the Detroit Red Wings, the first thing I notice is that all their top guys in terms of points are owned up. You've got Raymond, 91, Larkin at 94, DeBrincat 89, Sider at 97. The only guy who is available is Patrick Kane at 59%. We'll touch on him in just a second. You also have a couple of deeper options. So it's either everybody's owned up in terms of their power play exposure, and then the rest of these guys are really low ownership and potentially not even worth owning for a lot of them. But with that, we'll start with Patrick Kane. He is your best ad this week if you can get him. 59% owned, line 2, power play 1, 97th percentile in power play production. You know what you're going to get out of him. He is sort of a power play merchant, but Detroit is the number 1 team in terms of the amount of goals that come from their power play as a percentage of their total goals. So they rely on that power play. They're one of the top 3 power plays since January 1st. So they're red hot in terms of, clicking on the power play unit, and he is racking up the points. 10 points in his last 9 games. A lot of those coming on the power play. 21 power play points on the season. The shot volume is decent for a guy who's known more as a passer, but he can score goals, and he does shoot a little bit here, so that's nice to see. He was trending up really well from mid-December onward, plateaued a little bit. Here's the 4 Nations break, but he did bump after that, so he's still playing really well. If he's available, definitely go out and grab him. If he's not available, there are a couple of other options. One guy I wanted to look at in terms of a deeper league play, Marco Kasper, line 2. He occasionally gets some power play time. He's a little bit more of a skilled forward, younger, kind of, one of the top picks that they had made in the past couple drafts. And he's getting a little bit of a look here in the top 6. He does occasionally get power play time, but isn't listed there. I updated these this morning, so not currently there. But the hits per game volume is surprising to me. Almost 2 hits per game out of this guy, so that's really nice to see in terms of a peripheral floor. 6% ownership. You could do a lot worse than that for line 2 exposure, and that means he's playing with Patrick Kane. So definitely something to note there. If you're looking for pretty much anything else, there's not a ton to look at. Eric Gustafsson is playing relatively well. 4 points in his last 9. A little bit of power play exposure on power play 2. 1% owned. So this is your deep league. A little bit of power play exposure option. Other than that, they brought in Craig Smith. I don't really see him as fantasy ownable. Not bad in terms of getting power play 2 exposure, but line 4 is not great. 78th percentile in goals is not bad, but 9 goals in 40 games on the season. So nothing crazy there. Simon Edvinsson is another defenseman you could potentially look at. Pretty good blocks production, 93rd percentile. Penalty kill 1, so if you're, he's probably not going to get shorthanded points, but he's definitely going to get those shot blocks with that penalty kill exposure. And he's on the second pair, which is going to mean he's going to get some ice time. So nothing really crazy, no power play exposure, not a lot of shot volume, no goals because of that. Well, he's got 7 goals in 59 games on the season. But yeah, just not a ton of defensive options for you, and not a lot of depth options either. It's all coming from that top power play unit, and Kane is the main guy to look at. So if he's not available, maybe you have to look elsewhere, and we gave you some options from Utah. But what we're going to do now is take a look at the player hub that is filtered to just the teams with the 4-game weeks. We'll potentially add in Buffalo because they have the 2 light night games at the front of the week. Looking at the ads for this week, these are 4-game weeks. We also have some Buffalo guys in there because they've got a 3-game week, but 2 light nights on the Monday and Wednesday. So if you want to start those guys early in the week, drop them, and then add somebody with a 3 and 4 towards the end of the week, that would help you out in terms of game volume. And the number 1 guy for this entire list is JJ Peterka, 51 points in 59 games, 0.86 points per game, 12 power play points. Shot volume is pretty good. Everything offensively is pretty good. 87th percentile or better. He's 49% owned. He's power play 1 and line 1. So he would be getting you Tage Thompson exposure. He's on fire on the power play as well. So JJ Peterka, if available, could be a decent option for you. We have a couple of other guys. We've talked about guys like Schmaltz. We talked about Terry last week, Cooley, Gunther, all these guys you've noticed here. You got Jason Zucker, another Buffalo ad. He's going to be really good for power play points. I mentioned him last week, 93rd percentile in power play, 0.81 point per game. So pretty close to JJ Peterka in terms of raw point per game numbers. He's getting you more power play points, fewer shots, and then just a little bit of an uptick in hits, close to a hit per game for Zucker. He's 20% owned, so probably the better value in terms of the guys that you can find from Buffalo. Now, in terms of some of the hotter guys this week, there are a couple of guys that we haven't really talked about too much. One guy that I've noticed was picked up in a bunch of leagues, Mackie Samoskevich. He's playing in Florida. He's on power play 1 right now, which is why he's gotten picked up. 2% owned, 1.76 hits per game is a nice floor for your peripheral coverage there. 5 power play points on the year, 21 points in 54 games. This may change because they are going to bring in Marchand. Marchand could factor in on the power play. So this is line assignment dependent, but In those deep leagues where you need some hits volume and some power play exposure, he's also playing line 2, which is really nice to see. And he's been trending up most of the year, basically since November onward. He's been trending in the right direction. So Sam Moskowitz, your deep league target. If you're looking for a defenseman, one of the hottest defensemen that you can find is Noah Hannafin. Maybe not findable at this point, 76% rostered, but he is the power play quarterback for Vegas. So if he's available in your shallow league, 8 points in his last 7 games. Shooting percentage is reasonable, so he can continue that and potentially increase his goal totals. But he's been pretty good for the last couple of weeks here. You've got a couple other guys that we know and expect some production from. One of those is Arturi Lehkonen. Lehkonen is the power play guy most of the time. They sometimes have Nichushkin in there. He's line 1 playing with McKinnon and Necas, so that's going to be the main reason to own him. He is showing here as power play 2, so please keep an eye on that if you're picking up Lehkonen or Nichushkin. I don't even know if they're going to be able to use Brock Nelson on that top unit. They might be able to, but their second unit should be a lot better now if they have Nelson, if they have Ross Colton on that unit. Devon Taves could be on that unit as well. So there's a number of options. His shooting percentage is relatively high, but he has been a goal scoring type of player this year. 99th percentile in goals, about a half a goal per game for a guy like Lehkonen is incredible. 26 goals in 51, 39 points, only 4 power play points. So even when he's not doing it on the power play, he'll get you some goals and he'll chip in some shots as well. 86th percentile in shots. Now, we talked about guys like Hayton. We talked about Kane. We talked about some of those guys. They're relatively hot heading into a 4-game week. There's a couple of other guys that we could talk about. I might have to scroll for them here. They might not be right at the top of this list. We had Lehkonen down here. Don't see him off the top. Here's Mason McTavish. So McTavish, 8 points in his last 9 games. Relatively hot. He does hit a little bit, 45th percentile there. The power play numbers are okay. And then he's also got, see if I have it here, the power play 1 deployment. So line 3, power play 1 for Mason McTavish. Power play 1 exposure at 13% ownership. You probably picked him up last week if we were talking about this because they have the 4-game week last week and the 4-game week this week. So if you did, it's probably paying off for you pretty well. And if not, you can still add him on a 4-game week this week. Power play 1 exposure at 13% is pretty good, and 8 points in his last 9 is also good. So he also does get some face-off wins if you need those as well. Another guy that we talked about last week is probably further down on this list because of his raw point totals. Will Cooley. If you're looking for a Ranger, he's probably the best option again this week. Lafreniere still not really producing the way that he normally would. You get the 3.65 hits per game from Cooley, 6 points in his last 8 games. 4 of those are goals. He's line 2 with JT Miller and Mika Zibanejad. Zibanejad, one of the hottest players in the league since Miller came over. So this is a really potent line. They forecheck really hard. They get tons of hits. He's getting power play 2 exposure as well. They don't play that second unit that often, but getting a little penalty kill time as well. 35% roster for a guy like Cooley who's going to dominate in hits and then potentially add some goals on top of that. I've rostered him basically since November and never thought twice about it. Because of that hits volume, he's going to give you a nice peripheral floor. So that's something to keep note of if you're looking for a bit of a difference on hits coverage in your forward group. Now, if you want to find some D, we can filter this list a little bit further down and find some defensive options. Obviously, Lacombe, he was a lot lower last week when I talked about him. I believe he was in the 30s in terms of his ownership percentage. Now at 58%, all of you went out and picked him up. So the blocks are still there, 91st percentile. He is the power play quarterback. I believe if I still click on this morning was updated, so it may not have come in yet, but Lacombe should be the power play 1 guy. So he'll get you some power play points. Shot volume is decent. Assists are pretty good, and the blocks are still there. Shooting percentage right in the wheelhouse, and 10 points in his last 9 games. You can't really find much better than that on the wire in terms of defensemen. We also saw Jake Wallman. We kind of touched on him in the trade section, but I do think he's going to lose that power play assignment, so that might diminish his availability in terms of what he could do for you in fantasy. I don't know if any of you have Aaron Ekblad available. He's at 68% ownership, but 6 points in his last 7 games. Very assist heavy, all assists. But with that 92nd percentile in that metric, he does get some power play time. I don't think he's going to hold on to that power play unit if they're going to potentially go to Seth Jones at some point. But right now, D1, power play 1, and penalty kill 1. So getting a ton of minutes, and this team just got a lot better at the deadline. So there's a lot more offense to go around to replace the offense that they're going to lose with Tkachuk out until the playoffs. One other guy that we could talk about in a week like this, Thomas Chabot, another shallow league play, 67% owned. He's power play 2, so he is not necessarily the best deployment, but they do use both of their units, and power play 2 is going to feature Cousins. Gaudette was playing pretty well on that unit today. I'm recording this right after the Rangers game. I'm absolutely devastated that they gave that game away. But with that, Chabot looked pretty good. 90th percentile in terms of blocks. Shot volume is really good, 2.35 per game. And the assists are there. So the power play exposure is nice. The ownership is a little high given all of this. You could probably find a little bit better value. But 3 points in his last 6 isn't bad either. And him and Sanderson both looked really dynamic in this game today. In terms of some other ads, there's maybe 1 or 2 other guys. Filip Hronek at 42% owned. He played really well the other night, 6 points in his last 8 games. This is a really decent defensive ad when he's paired with Quinn Hughes. Quinn Hughes is out right now, but that means he's getting more ice time. So D1 and power play 1, that's the key factor here. Normally he would never be power play 1 with Quinn Hughes, but the assist numbers are there, 90th percentile there, 80th in power play points, getting 1.54 hits, 1.24 blocks per game is not bad for more offensive-minded defensemen. So there are a couple of options on the waiver wire, but it's probably not your best week in terms of lower ownership defensemen. So that's going to do it for the defensive section. Up next, let's turn to the goaltending hub and look at the goaltending. We'll start it off with a guy who obviously changed teams, and a lot of you jumped on this and picked him up, but he's still only 31% owned. Spencer Knight, now arguably the starter in Chicago. They do have Soderblom there, but they got rid of Peter Mrazek, so it's pretty much Spencer Knight's net. And he's had 2 really good starts since coming over, a 41 save performance against LA, and then a 36 save performance against Utah, a 976 and a 923. That'll lead to a 951 combined save percentage since coming over in that trade. He's been trending up previously. Obviously, he was on a good team. This team defense now looks way worse for him. He was well above expected with Florida, so that's where a lot of this data is coming from. 2 shutouts on the year, 913 save percentage, 2.4 goals against. The wins might not be there anymore, but he did get 2 of them. He's got 3 in his last 3 starts, so he is playing really well. This could be that initial bump. I don't know how long this lasts, but with that said, you can get a starter at 31% owned who's going to get a ton of save volume, which only 61st percentile there because he wasn't a huge starter, and obviously Florida a much better defensive team, but now he's going to rack up the saves as he just put up, as I'm doing the quick mental math, 77 saves in 2 games since coming over to Chicago. So that's the main factor. If you are in a league with total saves, definitely go out and pick up Spencer Knight. Another potential starter that you can get access to at 38% now is Karel Vejmelka. He started in back-to-back games, which was a little unusual. He had a great first back-to-back game against Detroit, gave up 2 goals on 40 shots, so 38 saves, 950 save percentage. But then in the second night of the back-to-back against Chicago on the road, they started him again for whatever reason, 21 saves on the night, 4 goals against, 840 save percentage. That's going to combine. He's got a 904 over the last 3 starts. He was really good before that, 938, 955, 938, and then an 897, 950, and then an 840. So I don't want to see them use him like that, but they have a 4-game week next week with plenty of time in between starts. So he might get all 4. He'll at least get you 3 starts next week. 91st percentile goal saved above expected. Everything else is reasonably good. 910 is not great, but it's not bad either. He's definitely, he's 77th percentile there, so really good there. 2.5 goals against, not bad. The wins were the problem earlier in the year. He started to get those in the last little bit, so he's got 4 wins in his last 6. He's arguably their number 1 right now. They don't seem to be using Ingram at all, so Vejmelka, a starter at 38% owned. He's another guy that you could potentially add in a week like this, 4-game week for him. I have to scroll a little bit for this, but another guy that we've talked about briefly in the past, another potential starter in the same roster percentage range, Elvis Merzlikins. Excellent save percentage over his last 3, 917. 1 win in his last 3, so the wins haven't been there as much. but you can, potentially get access to him, a starter on a team that's looking to make a playoff run right now. They were playing really well for a pretty decent stretch there. He's lost his last 2 games, but last game was a pretty decent performance with 33 saves on 35 shots, 943 save percentage. The game before that against Tampa, still made 34 saves, even though he gave up 5. And then he's got 3 wins in the previous 3 games before that. So he seems to go hot and cold. 4 straight losses, 3 straight wins, 2 straight losses. So that's the one knock on his file, is that he's not as consistent. The team defense isn't great, but they are getting healthier. They might get Goodbranson back soon, or maybe he's already back. I don't know. I wasn't watching the last game, but that should help their D. Their forward group is rounding into form and getting healthier. 89th percentile in terms of total saves because of that team defense deficiency there. But he's gotten a bunch of wins on the season, mainly because he starts a lot. 86th percentile in terms of games played, 88th in wins. So if this team is someone that you believe in going down the stretch, 37% ownership for their starting goaltender is not bad either. One last guy I want to talk about, might have to scroll for him. Actually, he's up a little bit further up. Lucas Dostal. He was, up here and then up here. He was at 2 different points in the season, one of the best goaltenders in fantasy. He was in the top 10. Now he's 22nd, and that's with him splitting time with John Gibson and with this team defense being dead last. So horrible team defense. Excellent goals saved above expected. Excellent total save volume. He's still got a 910. The wins aren't going to be there in general, but they've, they've had a little bit of a push lately. I don't know how much of this continues, but John Gibson, I believe, was day to day. He went down with some sort of injury. So Dostal could potentially be the guy for them this week. He'll at least get you 3 starts. He might get you 4, depending on the availability of John Gibson. They play Sunday as well. So if you're watching this before the end of this week, he might get you that 1 start against the Islanders, who just traded away Brock Nelson. So they're going to be a little bit hard. They don't score a lot to begin with, let alone with losing one of their top offensive guys. So that could be a nice spot start for Lucas Dostal. And then he's got Tuesday, Wednesday back-to-back. I don't know how they're going to handle that, but they've got Washington and then at Utah. So this has been another story where when he's the starter, he's been excellent, especially with total saves, save percentage, things like that. 915 over his last 3 games, but only 1 win. So another thing, kind of like Merzlikins, where this team is kind of making a playoff push. He could be the number 1 for the next week or so, and they're just seemingly not getting the wins over the last couple of starts. They lost 4-3 to St. Louis, 18 saves in that one, but the game before that, 14 saves on 15 shots in relief against Vancouver, and the game before that, 32 saves, 941 save percentage in a 6-2 win at Edmonton. So an impressive win against what should be one of the best teams in the Pacific. They're trying to make a playoff push. You could get their starting goaltender potentially for this week at 43% ownership. Don't want to go too deep into this. You can find access to this in the description below at the Patreon link there. I want to thank you all for watching. This is, again, the critical time of your playoff season where you're needing to make those ads either to get ready for playoffs or to get into the playoffs. So if you have any advice for me, I'm desperately trying to get into the playoffs in a couple leagues. Leave that in the comments section below. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.